When you think about the glass in your car, you probably think about it as a source of clarity. You think about it as a protective barrier. It is a marvel of modern engineering, designed to be both incredibly strong and completely invisible. It is the thing that allows you to see the world while keeping the world's elements away from you. It protects you from the wind. It protects you from the dust. It protects you from the rain. It is a safety feature that we rely on every single day without a second thought. We trust it to hold up. We trust it to define the space between the safety of our vehicle and the environment outside. It is a boundary. It is a clear, sturdy, and reliable boundary. And as long as that glass is intact, we feel a certain measure of security. But what happens when that boundary is not respected? What happens when the very thing designed to protect you becomes the point of impact? Last week, something happened that shattered that sense of security for one person in a way that was as sudden as it was final. A woman named Renee Nicole Good was in her car. She was behind her driver's side window. She was behind her windshield. And an officer from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, shot right through it. They shot through her windshield. They shot through her open driver's side window. That protective barrier, that clear piece of safety glass, was the last thing between her and a federal agent's weapon.
Trump's attack on Minneapolis in particular has been absolutely chaotic and bizarre and totally incoherent, even more so in the wake of the killing of Renee Nicole Good last week by an ICE officer who last week shot her 3 times through her windshield and her open driver's side window.
And that act, that shooting, has become a flashpoint for something much larger and much more chaotic than a single incident on a single street corner. What we are seeing right now is a pattern of behavior that is hard to describe as anything other than totally incoherent. It is a series of actions that appear on their face to be completely bizarre. When we talk about federal law enforcement, we generally expect a certain level of professional conduct. We expect protocols. We expect a chain of command. We expect that there is a clear legal basis for every action taken, especially when those actions involve heavy weapons and the use of force. But what is happening on the ground in places like Minneapolis is being described as absolutely chaotic. It is being described as an attack, and the people on the receiving end of this chaos are not just seeing it, they are suing. They are taking the Trump administration to court to try to stop what they describe as an attack by federal agents on their cities and their states.
Speaking of suing the Trump administration, the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois and the state of Minnesota and the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis have all brought major lawsuits tonight against the Trump administration to try to stop the attack by Trump's federal agents on those states and those cities.
This isn't just one person complaining about a bad interaction. This is a systemic breakdown of what we understand law enforcement to be. We are looking at a situation where the state of Illinois and the state of Minnesota have both brought major lawsuits. The city of St. Paul has brought a lawsuit. The city of Minneapolis has brought a lawsuit. These are major legal actions brought by major jurisdictions to stop what is being characterized as an attack by Trump's federal agents. It is an extraordinary legal move, and it is being driven by events that sound less like professional law enforcement and more like something out of a badly scripted action movie. It is chaotic, it is bizarre, and it is happening in broad daylight in American neighborhoods. Let's look at the pattern. Let's look at how this is actually playing out in the streets. In Minneapolis, there was a home. It was a home where a family lived. There were kids inside that home, and today heavily armed officers broke down the door of that home. They didn't just knock, they broke the door down. The homeowner did what any of us would do in that situation. They demanded to see a warrant. They asked to see the legal document from a judge that says these people have the right to force their way into a private residence. But according to reporting from the Associated Press, those agents did not have a warrant. They did not have a document from a judge authorizing their forced entry.
The Associated Press reporting tonight that those agents didn't have a warrant from a judge authorizing their forced entry into a private residence, but they just did it anyway, into a home with kids inside, apparently completely disregarding any applicable law.
They just did it anyway. They disregarded the law. They disregarded the presence of children. They just broke in. Think about the scale of that. Think about the message that sends to a community. If a federal agent can break down your door without a warrant, what is the law even for? This isn't an isolated mistake. This is part of a series of events that occurred just today. While that was happening at one house, something else was happening on 36th Street in South Minneapolis. A man named Christian Molina was driving south. He is a US citizen. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He says he inadvertently made eye contact with an ICE officer. That officer was lurking in an alley, watching cars go by. And because of that eye contact, the agent decided to give chase. The agent didn't just pull him over. The agent literally rammed his car into Mr. Molina's vehicle. He rammed into the rear driver's side of a US citizen's car.
The ICE agent then chased him and literally rammed his car into Mr. Molina. Rammed his car into Mr. Molina's vehicle, into the rear driver's side of his car, and then demanded that Mr. Molina show his papers. Mr. Molina is a US citizen.
And then after ramming the car, the agent demanded that Mr. Molina show his papers. This is a man driving down a street in his own city. According to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the situation escalated quickly. But it didn't escalate because Mr. Molina was a threat. It escalated because the community saw what was happening. Dozens of people from the neighborhood came outside. They saw a fellow resident being confronted. They saw a man who knew his rights. Mr. Molina told those agents that he knew his rights. He told them that this was an illegal stop. He told them he didn't need to show them anything. And the neighborhood backed him up. They poured into the street to support him. And here is where the chaotic and bizarre part really comes into play. When faced with a crowd of citizens questioning the legality of their actions, what did these federal agents do? They didn't explain their legal authority. They didn't produce a warrant. They didn't wait for supervisors. They set off 2 tear gas canisters right there in the street, and then they ran away.
And after all of those people poured into the street to support this guy, the agents, I kid you not, what did they do? They set off 2 tear gas canisters in the street and then ran away.
They fled the scene. They threw chemical weapons at a crowd of neighbors, and then they ran. That was their contribution to public order and safety in South Minneapolis today. They hit a citizen's car, demanded papers, gassed the neighborhood, and then they retreated. This is the evidence we are seeing. It is evidence of a force that seems to have no clue what they are doing. These aren't just anecdotes. These are events documented by the Associated Press and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. These are events that are leading to multi-state lawsuits, and the pattern continues. Over the weekend, there was another standoff. A woman was doing her job. She was delivering food for DoorDash. ICE agents apparently began chasing her. They chased her into the home of the customer where she was dropping off the food. They followed her onto private property, but they ran into someone they didn't expect. They ran into a homeowner who stood her ground. The homeowner was in a fit of what is described as righteous rage. She told those ICE agents that they were not coming into her home. She was not letting them in. She didn't just yell, she took action. She called the police on the federal agents. She called her neighbors, and the neighbors responded. They didn't just watch from their windows. They came out. They stood there. They blew whistles. They yelled at the agents. They made it clear that this behavior was not acceptable on their block. And eventually, just like on 36th Street, the agents left. They drove away. They left without the DoorDash driver they were pursuing as if she were a high-level fugitive. They terrorized a home and a block, and then they fled when the community stood up. The scale of this is shifting. It's moving from individual street corners to larger venues. Even an hour outside of Minneapolis, in St. Cloud, Minnesota, we saw this same bizarre show of force. Dozens of agents tried to muster a military-style presence in a mini-mall parking lot. They wanted to look tough. They were masked. They were armed. But the result was the same. They were soon surrounded by hundreds of local residents telling them to get out. These agents, who are supposedly there to project power, were so overwhelmed by the neighborhood's response that they actually got stuck. They couldn't leave the parking lot. It got to the point where a Democratic state senator had to intervene. The senator had to ask the crowd to please let the federal agents leave because they were otherwise trapped. These tough guy masked agents had to wait for permission to turn tail and go home. They left, as it was described, with their tails between their legs. This is not what professional immigration law enforcement looks like. This is something else entirely. It looks like people who have been given military-style weapons and gear, but have no idea how to use them in a civilian environment. There is a historical weight to the idea of secret police. When we think about law enforcement, we think about badges. We think about identifying marks. We think about accountability. But these agents are being described as masked and unbadged. They are operating like a secret police force. The criticism being leveled against them is that they appear to have learnt their tactics not from professional training but from playing video games about real wars. They are being accused of fantasizing about being scary. They are acting out a fantasy of combat in the middle of American cities, and the consequences are real. The consequence is a woman shot through her windshield. The consequence is a family's door broken down without a warrant. The human authority on the ground is clear. Local school kids in Minneapolis have seen enough. They didn't wait for a lawsuit to be filed. They staged a mass walkout. They walked out of their schools to tell these federal agents to leave them alone. They walked out to tell them to get out of their town. When the youth of a city feel the need to walk out of school to protest the presence of federal agents, you are looking at a fundamental breakdown of the relationship between the government and the governed. You are looking at a community that no longer sees these agents as protectors but as a source of chaos. Let's look at the legal and democratic norms at play here. In a democracy, law enforcement is bound by the law. That sounds like a simple concept, but it is the bedrock of everything we do. You need a warrant from a judge to enter a home. You need a legal reason to stop a car and demand papers. You need to be identifiable so that if you break the law, you can be held accountable. What we are seeing in these reports is a total disregard for those norms. We are seeing agents who do not have warrants. We are seeing agents who ram cars over eye contact. We are seeing agents who use chemical weapons and then run away from the citizens they are supposed to serve. The states of Illinois and Minnesota are not just suing because they are unhappy with the administration's policies. They are suing because they are seeing an attack on their cities. They are seeing a federal force that is acting in a way that is incoherent and bizarre. They are seeing a force that is unbadged and masked, operating like a secret police. This is a challenge to the power of the states and the rights of the individuals living within them. It is a challenge to the idea that the law applies to everyone, including those wearing the gear and carrying the weapons. So what changes? The immediate change is that the community is no longer intimidated. If these tactics were meant to scare people into staying home, they are having the exact opposite effect. They are not attracting people to their cause. They are not intimidating people into not turning out to protest. They are not stopping people from recording what they are doing. In fact, people are turning out in hundreds. Neighbors are blowing whistles. School kids are walking out. If the goal was intimidation, these agents were very seriously wrong about how that would work. What stays is the legal battle. The lawsuits from the states and the cities will move forward. The reports from the Associated Press and the Star Tribune will continue to document these incidents. The killing of Renee Nicole Good and the ramming of Christian Molina's car are now matters of public record and legal contention. These events are not disappearing. They are being stacked up as evidence of a federal force that has lost its way. A force that is operating without the most basic legal authorities, like a warrant from a judge. It matters because the way these agents are conducting themselves is a reflection of how power is being used. When you give people military gear and tell them to go into cities without badges and without warrants, you are creating a recipe for the kind of chaos we saw in South Minneapolis today. You are creating a situation where a DoorDash delivery ends in a standoff with neighbors blowing whistles. You are creating a situation where federal agents have to be rescued by a state senator because they got themselves stuck in a mini-mall parking lot. It matters because it reveals a level of cluelessness that is as dangerous as it is bizarre. In the end, the transparency of that windshield we talked about earlier is a lot like the transparency we expect from our institutions. We need to be able to see through the actions of our government to the legal basis underneath. We need to know that the barriers between us and the use of force are strong and reliable. But right now in Minnesota and Illinois, that transparency is gone. It has been replaced by masks, by unbadged uniforms, and by a series of actions that defy logic and law. The community is responding with whistles, with walkouts, and with lawsuits. They are standing their ground, even as the agents tasked with order are the ones fleeing the scene. This is a story about what happens when the professional standards of law enforcement are replaced by tough guy fantasies and video game tactics. It is a story about what happens when the people living in these neighborhoods decide that they are not going to be intimidated. It is a story about the states and cities stepping in to defend their residents from a chaotic federal intervention. And as these lawsuits move through the courts, we will see if the law can finally provide the warrant that these agents apparently thought they didn't need. The secret police tactics might be intended to project a certain kind of power, but when you look at what happened in St. Cloud, or on 36th Street, that power looks incredibly fragile. It looks like a force that doesn't know how to handle a neighborhood that knows its rights. It looks like a force that is more comfortable with a show of force than with the actual practice of law. And as the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul and St. Cloud and the states of Illinois and Minnesota continue to push back, the true nature of this chaotic and bizarre experiment is being exposed for everyone to see. The silence that follows the retreat of those agents, the silence that remains after the tear gas clears and the agents have driven away, is where the real questions remain. What happens next time? What happens when the next door is broken down? The answer for now seems to be that the community will be there, the neighbors will be there, the lawsuits will be there, and the world will be watching, recording every move, waiting to see if the law will eventually be respected again. The narrative being built by these actions is one of a federal government at odds with its own citizens, using tactics that belong in a fantasy rather than a functional democracy. It is a narrative of a community that has found its voice in the face of heavy-handed and incoherent pressure, and it is a narrative that is far from over. As the states of Illinois and Minnesota lead the charge in court, the bizarre and chaotic events of today will become the evidence of tomorrow. The secret police may be masked, but their actions are being brought into the light. When the agents left St. Cloud with their tails between their legs, they weren't just leaving a parking lot. They were leaving behind a community that had seen through the mask. They were leaving behind a record of failure, and they were leaving behind a city that had decided quite clearly that this was not the way they were going to be governed. The chaos in Minneapolis is a symptom of a much deeper problem, one that involves the very definition of law and order in this country. And as we watch these lawsuits unfold, we are watching to see if that definition can be reclaimed. The clarity we expect from our windshields and our laws is the same. We need to know what is in front of us. We need to know that the protections we rely on are real. Right now, those protections are being tested by a force that seems to have forgotten who it serves and what the law requires. But the response from the ground, from the homeowners, the drivers, the neighbors, and the students suggests that the people haven't forgotten. They know their rights, they know the law, and they are not going anywhere. As this situation continues to develop, the focus will remain on these specific incidents. Each one is a piece of a larger puzzle. Each one is a document of a moment where the federal government chose chaos over order, and where the community chose to stand its ground. The total incoherence of the Trump administration's federal agents is no longer just a theory. It is a matter of public record, supported by testimony, by lawsuits, and by the actions of regular people who simply wanted to know where the warrant was. The final image of these events is not one of federal strength. It is an image of agents fleeing after a failed attempt at intimidation. It is an image of a community that refuses to be a backdrop for someone else's video game fantasy. It is an image of a state senator asking a crowd to let the secret police go home because they were too overwhelmed to leave on their own. It is a measured, quiet realization that the power of the law belongs to the people, and it is a power that these agents are only just beginning to understand. What stays is the memory of the whistles and the school walkouts. What stays is the legal requirement for a warrant. What stays is the fact that Renee Nicole Good was shot through her own windshield by an officer who was supposed to be upholding the law. And what stays is the determination of 2 states and 2 cities to make sure that this kind of chaotic and bizarre attack never happens again. The law is moving, and it is moving toward accountability. This is where we are. It is a story of a breakdown, but also a story of a response. It is a story of a federal force that appears clueless and a public that is anything but. The events in Minneapolis and beyond are a reminder that the transparency of our laws is something we must constantly defend, especially when someone tries to shatter it from the outside.